Hey there and welcome back to the course. In the last guide, we set up our background gradient, or not the gradient, but just a view. We went over auto layout constraints programmatically and got a view on the screen. So first thing I want to do in this video is change this -20 to say -100. And then instead of saying top anchor on the top anchor, what we want to attach it to is the view.safe area layout guide. So basically this is going to make it so it doesn't touch the top here, because technically this is a title view. So if you open up an app on your phone like Messages, or let me see, I'll open up my phone real quick. If you open up your message app, you'll see that there's a bar at the top and it either says edit with messages, or when you go in, it has the name of the person with a couple buttons. So that's what that is. We want to put it at the bottom of that. So let's say view.safe area layout guide.bottom anchor. And then constant 20, and then we have -100 on, not the right anchor, my bad, but the bottom anchor. So the right anchor, we still want to be -20. Now, if we reload the page, or not the page, since this is not a web app, I've been making a lot of web app tutorials. If we reload our app, we will see that it looks like something's broken. View.safe area layout guide.bottom anchor. Okay, so let's try and think about what's wrong. Let's look at our code here, and we're connecting the left anchor, which is good. We're connecting okay, so I see the error, and it's that we tried to connect it to the bottom anchor. So what we want to do is connect it to the top anchor, so it will be at the top of the screen, not the bottom. So let's select that, and then let's reload our application, and it will be loaded. So waiting, and you'll see that we now have it where we want it to be. If we look at the completed app on my screen, you'll see that they line up really close. So yeah, that's good. Now, the bulk of what I wanted this video to be about was the gradient. So let's create our gradient class. Let's right click on the folder and let's hit new file. And whenever I'm creating an app or something of my own, I'll either give it my initials or one of my company names, or I will give it something close to what the app is called. So for an app I made called Pocket Papers, which Brian of Let's Build That App reviewed. If you want to look at that on YouTube, it's kind of cool that he reviewed that. But basically, I'd give it like an initial of PP, and for Pocket Papers. Now, you can see this throughout the app with UIKit, such as UIView or NS Layout Anchor. You'll see that there's initials everywhere, 2 initials and then the name of the class. So in this case, we could do like your initials, mine are MN, or I could say like, let's see, this is called Get It Done. I could say GD. So we could call this GD and then gradient.swift. Now, I'm trying to think. I think I was going to name it something else. I can't remember. GD gradient is fine though. So let's just prefix all of our classes with GD for Get It Done. The app is called Get It Done, so GD is pretty close. So let's go ahead and do that. And then in here, we want to import UIKit. And then we want to make this a class of UIView. So we want to say class GD gradient. And then we want to say UIView. And then in here, we can basically type out our initializer. So this is a lot of what I'm doing here is object-oriented programming. It's not so much iOS programming, like it's not specific to what I want to teach in this course. So I won't explain too much about this. If you're really interested and don't know much about object-oriented programming yet, Google CS50 by Harvard. It's a free course on edx.org. It will really teach you the concepts and foundations of object-oriented programming. Although if you're not interested in that yet, but you still want to learn how to make iOS apps, you can do that. You can make tons of iOS apps, really good iOS apps, without knowing much about object-oriented programming. And a lot of it will come as you develop iOS apps. So don't worry if you don't know it. Just follow along with what I do, and I'll explain most of what I'm doing. So what I'm doing here is I'm just saying, okay, take a UIView and let's override it. Let's copy it. Let's make a UIView class, and let's add some custom behavior to it. So right now, it's just the UIView. There's nothing else. We haven't added any custom behavior. You'll see we have an error, and it says we have to provide this initializer. So just click the button and hit fix, and that will throw that in. Now, you don't need to worry about that means, just leave it. We just want to write some code in here. So we also want to add in something right here. And what we want to add in right here is we need to tell our, we need to override our layer, the layer, and provide it with a CAGradientLayer. We need to tell our class that its layer is CAGradientLayer, and that will provide us the gradient. So let's type in override class var layer class, and then colon any class. So we're just saying it's of any class type. That's all any class means. Now we can say return CAGradientLayer dot self. Now you'll notice that it says CA and then gradient. So very similar to what we're doing. It's just convention to have these two kind of initials. So we have CAGradientLayer dot self. Now with that, we can basically tell our class now that it's of type layer. Now to do this, we just have to say if let layer is equal to self.layer. So basically all we're doing here is saying, okay, let's take layer and apply it to a variable called layer. Now, the reason we're putting it in if is because we're going to try and cast it as a CAGradientLayer. So we're saying as CAGradientLayer. Now, the reason we have to do this with this question mark is because self.layer, if you command click on it or command click and hit show quick help, you'll see it's of type CALayer. So by saying as, we're saying, okay, can we change this to a CAGradientLayer? And if you command click on CAGradientLayer and hit quick help, you'll see that this is also of type CALayer. So basically we can cast this layer as a gradient. So we're just taking a normal layer class of a view because it's a layer, and we're saying, okay, let's give this the gradient functionality. Okay, well, let's give it the ability to have a gradient. So it says description, a layer that draws color gradient over its background color, filling the shape of the layer, including rounded corners. You use a gradient layer to create a color gradient. You know what a gradient is. Basically, we can provide up to 4 colors. So what we want to do is provide not 4 colors, but 2 colors. So let's go in here and let's say layer.colors is equal to 2 colors. Now, these have to be CG colors, so we can't use UI colors, but we have to get the color from UI colors. So what we can do is we can say UI color.blue, and then we can say .CG color to cast it into a CG color, or get the CG color from the UI color. So our UI color blue contains a CG color representation. We're not casting it like we are with our layer. And then we want to put a comma and say UI color let's see, what do we want to make this? Let's go with I don't want to make it green, that's ugly. Let's go with gray for now, CG color. Now, we're obviously not going to use those colors because our design requests different colors, but we'll get into that in the next video. So what we're doing now is we're just specifying the colors and the locations. So what we need to do now is say layer.locations, and you'll see if you type out locations, it says NS number array. If you waited on colors, it would say that except for CG colors. So if I say colors, okay, it's of any type, but basically an array of CG color ref objects. I'm surprised it's not just CG color. There must be a reason for that, but basically we want this to say locations, and then we just need to say is equal to 0 and 1.2. So basically if we did 1, it would just go to the top. If we do like 20, you're probably only going to see UI color blue because the gray is not going to come for a hot minute. So let's save this and let's try using this class. And one thing I want to do in this class is type out translates auto resizing mask into constraints is equal to false. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because back in our view controller.swift, we're saying this on the view, and we know we want to anchor this gradient to the screen, so we might as well just specify this inside of the gradient immediately, right? So let's just do that. Now, one thing I want to point out is that we're saying self.layer here, right? We could also do that right here. Translates auto resizing mask is part of the UIView, right? Because if we go into welcome controller, we're saying view. View in this case is basically self. View is itself, right? It's itself, the instance. So self.layer, if we were to access self.layer outside of this class, after we've kind of initialized it and put it in a variable, then we would just say view.layer, and we do that in welcome controller. We're saying view.layer. Now this view right here has nothing to do with our gradient. It's just that it happens to be a UIView as well, so that's why I'm referencing it. So view.layer. So view.translates auto resizing mask into constraints. Same thing. So I just want to be explicit with some concepts. I feel like that's an important when you understand is at least how the view works, at least how classes work in the sense that self is basically the instance of it, right? If you've done any JavaScript, and I've noticed React touches a lot on this, the keyword this, it's basically self. I do a lot of React. This is basically this in JavaScript, okay? Now, I believe in C++ and languages like that, it's this, I believe. I haven't done that for a while, for a year or two. But basically, I'm going off topic. So now we can use CAGradient. We can go into our welcome controller. Instead of using UIView, let's use CAGradient. We don't need this because we know that's going to be in there. And then we can say right here, GD gradient. Now, one thing I want to point out is that this is of type UIView still, but we're saying GD gradient. Why do we call this UIView? And that's because the same thing we're doing with self.layer is CAGradientLayer. These are both of type CALayer. So like, remember how we command clicked on these and hit show quick help? You see it CALayer, but this is clearly CAGradientLayer, not just CALayer. Same exact thing with our GD gradient. It's because this class is extending CALayer. So if we were to type that out, we'd say CALayer, and then right here we would say CAGradientLayer. So that's how that's built. So it's same way with our GD gradient. So that's a little more specific on object-oriented programming, but again, I think I'm going to kind of explain these things more in depth because I know that all the Swift stuff I've found, it doesn't really explain in depth how these things work, what they actually mean. And I don't blame them because that's a lot of time, but I want to point out some specific things as we go throughout these courses. So if we go back to welcome controller, we have our GD gradient, right? We could even specify that this is GD gradient, but I want to just leave it as UIView just so you can kind of understand that concept. Now I want to see if this works. I've never tried this, but you know how we command clicked on these things in GD gradient? Let's try and do that here. So yeah, that's awesome. It extends UIView, and then if you command click on UIView, it obviously it is a little more involved, but it's a UIView. So let's go ahead and let's reload the app because this should work. Let's hit, first thing I want to do is get rid of this background color, and then I want to kill the app using this square up here, and then hit play. And then we should see our gradient, and if I remember correctly, we put blue and gray. While that's loading up on our phone, I'm going to go over to the design. And let's see. So yeah, you'll see that it's blue and it goes to gray. Really awesome stuff. And you'll notice that there's more blue on the screen and there's less gray, and that's because we specified the gray to end at 1.2 rather than 1. If we did 1, it would kind of look exactly like in the middle, if you know what I'm saying. So let's get these colors in because these look a lot nicer for our design. So let's click on this. Well, I'll click on it. You can't see it. And our first color is going to be a hex color. Now you can go ahead and you can put in these RGBs, but I'm going to use a hex color, and we're going to be doing that in the next video because that's going to require that we write out some additional code so we can create basically an initializer on our UI color class so we can actually use hex colors. So that's also one thing you'll be learning in this course is how to rate custom initializers, helper convenience initializers. So let's go ahead and you can write those down if you want in your code, but let's get those in hex format in the next video. So yeah, I'll see you then.